Hey everyone, welcome back to our Prisma Cloud Native Security Summit, the State of Cloud Native Security, brought to you by Prisma Cloud by Palo Alto Networks. We are discussing shifting all the way left with our guest today, Vinay Venkataraman, Cloud CTO, Prisma Cloud. He's with Palo Alto Networks, as is Ashley Ward, Solutions Architect for Palo Alto Networks, and Aqsa Taylor, Product Manager, Prisma Cloud, Palo Alto Networks. Let's get started. I am curious about why shifting left is so discussed today. What are its roots? How does it rise out of DevOps? What is it that is driving it as developers focus a lot on continuous delivery and just building software in a way that meets the requirements of the enterprise and makes sure that what they are developing is safe? So I thought I would just start the question maybe with Vinay and asking, what is shifting left? What does it mean? What does it mean to you?
Sure, absolutely. And I'd like to provide my developer perspective on this. And I think as we all realize, in the last half a decade or even more, applications have been transforming, and there's a tremendous pressure on DevOps teams to develop and ship code at a very rapid pace. Hence, what has happened is they're adopting the greatest and latest technologies from cloud providers. They are transforming their applications into containers. They are splitting themselves up into smaller teams, which is where they're splitting up the application from monolithic to microservices. All of these aspects has been fueled from the DevOps perspective. And what has lagged in this whole transformation is security. And so therefore, from my perspective, shifting left is the ability to inject security and meet DevOps where they are and providing them with the right tools to inject security along the DevOps pipeline, right from build, deploy, and last but not least, even from the runtime perspective.
So from the runtime perspective, Aqsa, what does that mean to you?
So a lot of times, previously, you would think of testing or security kind of like the end of the cycle. Like once the developers build the code, they ship the application, then the testing happens, then security happens during runtime and all of that processes. But imagine, what if we actually gave developers visibility into what they're building from security perspective? So instead of waiting for the security team from runtime and from testing teams come back with all this data and then ask the developers to rebuild their applications, by introducing visibility into what they're building from security perspective in the earlier cycles, we are helping or equipping developers to have still faster delivery of application, but also ensure good quality before it reaches the runtime. So you're actually reducing the time for delivery of applications by improving the security in earlier stages. And the more you can improve security in the beginning of the cycle, the better security can be during runtime and as your applications are available for end users. So I think it takes a really complete approach to security rather than just putting security or testing only during runtime focus or towards the end of the cycle and such.
So when you think about that, Ashley, and you're out there in the field and you're building out these solutions and you're dealing with security ops teams, how do you approach it to them? How do you discuss it as an agile approach of sorts?
I think it's the same as anything else, the way that we moved into the DevOps world. Coming from an operations background, I always looked at security as being part of operations anyway, because it was one of the things that we had to do. But obviously it was very siloed before. But if you think about why we've shifted operations left, so if you think about deployments, people are writing software. That software was getting tested through an application test cycle. It was then hitting a production platform, and that's where suddenly you had all these operations people saying, you can't do that. That doesn't work like that. This isn't going to be, it's not resilient, it's not secure, it's not all those things. So that costs a lot of money to suddenly have that stop at the moment you're delivering into production. The code's already been written, you've had people working on this, and now suddenly you've got an ops guy like me saying, no, you can't do it. And now we've moved past that. We've got dev and ops working together to fix things early on, shifted that left. And the same is true of security. So what ends up happening is if we come to a deployment and it's going to run in that runtime, that production environment, and security are then the blockers saying, no, you cannot do this, whilst that's for very good reasons, it can seem from a business perspective, oh, wait a minute, so you're just there to slow things down and stop things. So it's not just making the code and everybody more secure, it is actually delivering the business value because we're fixing things a lot earlier.
If I may, to echo a lot of the points that Ashley and Aqsa made, another way of looking at it is very often security teams and SOC teams spend 80% to 90% of their time with very small team sizes, figuring out, going through all the inundated alerts that they're exposed to. But now we want to flip that model on its head, where now you have far more developers. So if we could spend 80% of the time in the build and deploy phase and meet the developers where they are, provide them with instantaneous feedback and help them with their new shining toy, go address their issues, I mean, that's far more efficient, where we can spend 80% of the time there. And then, like I said, go maybe spend 10% in the deploy phase and then 10% in the runtime phase. It makes everyone along the entire pipeline a lot more efficient.
And to really layer on top of that, because that's absolutely the case, the other part was that previously, when we didn't have the security tools that could cope with it, or there was a large manual overhead or an expense towards security, then actually from a SOC point of view, I don't want to help the developers out because that's an awful lot more alerts that are coming in. But of course, that's all shifted around exactly as Vinay says. This is so important. We now have the tools and capabilities to deal with all of that and process it. So it makes it easier from a SOC perspective to have that done as far left as possible.
So how does this affect the QA team? How does this affect the people who maybe just have traditionally been involved in security operations whose roles are changing now? And how do you help them from feeling like they're not being left behind?
I can take a quick stab at that. I've been fortunate enough to actually be a part of building very, very large scale distributed applications. I mean, we literally part of a company that built AWS for the private cloud. So imagine building all the 100 services at that scale and that availability. So the model that we took there and the implication on QA is the developer, the model has dramatically changed. So now the developer has the onus for actually writing very, very good unit tests, the very, very good integration tests. And then, of course, the system tests is where the broader QA team is engaged. However, the other aspect of this is you can't expect DevOps to be security experts. Similarly, I'm clubbing QA as part of DevOps. And then on the flip side, security people to be DevOps experts. But now we are actually giving them the right tools, the visibility and the right remediation capabilities. So QA can also potentially play a big role in actually helping remediate and affording a more comprehensive security posture as applications get deployed into production.
So QA can play a bigger role. So when you're thinking about this and how the responsibilities of a developer and QA engineer are combined and integrated, how does that affect testing? How does that affect the way that people have traditionally been testing in their own historical environments?
I think as a product manager myself, I like involving QA and testing teams from the initial meetings. So when I do meetings with engineering on the requirements, on what my scenario or user cases for introducing a feature, I always like introducing or gathering together the QA teams in those beginning cycles as well, because I think it's important for the testing team to have the bigger goal in mind and then interact with the developer teams as they move forward on those user cases, on what they're supposed to test, instead of waiting till the whole application is built and then just give them like 3 or 4 use cases like, okay, this is what you test. But involving them further in the beginning of the cycles, you're giving them more visibility into the entire picture. And security-wise, you're also making them more enabled by combining them with developers as they do their testing and move forward. Because imagine having like 5 apples to peel all at a time, but like having to do one at a time, maybe in different stages. So I don't know, that was a stupid example.
That's good, I like it.
But like you maybe get the point, right? Like bring them earlier so they can chop the work rather than do all of it in the end at a time. So it's faster and better for all teams.
Maybe there's certain apple peelers. No, the thing with that though, you're absolutely right, Aqsa. Sorry, it was a little joke there. The thing is, QA and writing tests isn't easy. You know, there is a skill set involved in that. So it's not like QA disappears, because if you try and write down any type of software and try and do anything, even a simple shell script, it very soon becomes difficult to go, right, how do I write a test for that if I'm doing the test-driven development? And in the same way, that's where I think that QA definitely needs to be involved early, as Aqsa says, because that's where they can help write those tests for the security engineers, for those people, so that you're getting these proper tests that are then developed towards. So yeah, sorry, I'll try and think about something to do with apples, but I'll come back on that.
Better than apples, I'm sure.
And I just want to add to that, as I think there are multiple ways of consuming this and incorporating and involving the QA teams, because I think this is an add-on. So for example, you can think about security testing, and the number of times we talk about this, and I think it's just common language for us, but you know, security should not be an afterthought, right? I mean, that's the fundamental theme, because you would never let an application into production without going through its rigor in unit testing, integration testing, and systems testing. Similarly, we would love to incorporate the same kind of hygiene and process by incorporating with the right tools, which is the key capability and the concept, to incorporate security testing as well. And so QA therefore can play a very huge role in that process.
And building into those processes, exactly as you say, Vinay. I mean, that the idea, if you think back, the idea of having security tools in your IDE that would help you out as you're writing stuff, it's just that's no way. But that's reality, right? And if you're moving through that pyramid of testing and like making things automated, making them easy to consume, then you can have lint happening as you've got stuff going and the security test. So yeah, I think it's really exciting for QA, for security, and for the DevOps teams altogether.
When you're thinking about this and how you're thinking about testing across multiple environments, does the situation change at all in terms of how you're thinking about, you know, continuous delivery, for instance, when you're thinking about, or even when you're thinking about working across multiple, you know, cloud services or different clusters? Is there a complexity that comes with distributed computing to, you know, to the person who's trying to shift left and trying to bake in security?
Yeah, I mean, sure there is. I mean, the different environments have different security postures, and your different companies have different teams and different, all the different requirements. I mean, even just looking at a production environment, of course, you're going to have things in a DMZ, you're going to have things in a PCI zone, you've got a traditional production or on the corporate network or whatever. And then even before that, with the, as you mentioned there, Alex, the continuous delivery, continuous integration. I mean, if you think about the number of dev environments that might get spun up on demand for creating stuff. So there is going to be a difference. What I would say to people though is, don't focus on those complexities immediately. Focus instead on how can things be broken down to their simplest chunks so that you can repeatably perform that testing, whatever it may be. And so that way then when you do get those you know, edge cases that then become the majority, that's okay, because the testing can scale to that, because the testing's nice and small automated chunks. So yeah, be aware that you have different environments, think about the different security postures, but have a means of implementing those and testing those that's standard. I think that's what I would take from that. I don't know what other people in the panel think.
I mean, I think coming back to that question of heterogeneous environments, different types of environments, you know, some of us who are working on container security think that that's the be all and end all, but let's take it for what it is for now. You know, a lot of applications are being transformed and being deployed as containers. And the other big elephant in the room is Kubernetes has the mind share, right? So it's become the great normalizer here. So if you are looking at that, we have this tremendous ability, and coming back to shift left, where we can actually, everything is represented as an image. And so having the ability to scan your images, whether at build time, and a very, very powerful concept here is the pull request. I mean, if a developer, and having been one for 20 years of my life, if I can get the instantaneous feedback to say, hey, something's not right, I care about it and I want to fix it, and I have a greater appetite to fix it. Similarly, the ability to scan an image based on different types of policies in the deploy phase, I beg your pardon, in the registry scanning phase is incredibly powerful. So now you have your entire applications that are represented as infrastructure as code, Kubernetes, YAML, etc. But those artifacts can be scanned and you apply the right security rigor, and then they get deployed across a heterogeneous environment. So you have the ability to actually normalize and apply the right security controls much earlier before your applications go in the wild. So there's a great opportunity to install the right security practices for heterogeneous environments as well.
But are people doing it? Are developers really wanting to do this? I don't see much interest in it yet.
Interest in
in doing the scanning, in taking those precautions, so they don't have troubles further down the road.
I think it depends on how it is introduced. Your tool that you're introducing to your developers need to keep up with developers in mind. It cannot be a bottleneck. It cannot be a blocker for how they're working. A simple example is if your tool cannot differentiate between vulnerabilities that do have fixes and the vulnerabilities that do not have fixes, then you're stopping development process with a bunch of CVEs that may have no action item. So what is the developer going to do? Like filter through each one of them and be like, okay, which one do I fix? Which one doesn't have a fix? So the security tool you use, I think, really makes a difference in this case. The tool needs to be smart enough to give you actionable data so that the developers who are fast-paced don't have to do that manual work as they move forward. And then how you're introducing security, what kind of thresholds you're introducing. So this work can look like, oh my gosh, I have a blocker now that I have to deal with. But on the other end, if you do it properly, it can actually enable and equip them. So I think choosing the right tool plays an important role in following this process.
So can I just ask a quick follow-up question? What are the types of tools that support shifting left then?
Yep, I don't mind jumping in. There's lots of, anything that will allow you to run something automatically, of course, is something that's going to be a major thing there. Any of your different IDEs, a quick search of those will come back with plenty of different things that will run there. But really, you're looking at for each thing that you're building in a cloud native way, whether that's serverless functions or images or VMs, whatever you're doing, you have the option of using various different. There's open source technology, there's commercial products that are available. You have many different ways of putting those all together. The thing that you need to concentrate on is then gluing them all and stitching them all together. Now, obviously, there are different companies who offer solutions to do this for you, but really, some of the tools, do a search for security tools for your IDE of choice, your automation tooling of choice, Jenkins, of course, king of plugins, on Azure DevOps, whatever you're using there. But there'll be things that fit in with what you're doing. So if you're writing specific code, SemGrep was one that I heard of just recently and had a play with, and it's very, very cool. There's plenty of things that are out there and available.
Yeah. And if I may, I just want to, I think I get the easy job here. Aqsa and Ashley are setting this up. But to come back to the Aqsa's point, she's absolutely right. The right tooling. And that also goes back to something that we are very, very conscious at Prisma Cloud, which is culture, as we hear, is a big barrier to adoption between DevOps and, let's say, SecOps. But, SecOps thinks that, they don't trust DevOps to get security right. Whereas DevOps thinks that, hey, security doesn't understand our agility and our needs. So with the right tooling, there is a much greater appetite to actually adopting and taking ownership for security. And I also want to come back to what Ashley said in terms of the tooling, which is, for example, to highlight a couple of the capabilities in the shift left that Prisma Cloud has, which is infrastructure as code scanning. In order to tame the cloud, people realize that they have to have repeatable, reproducible capabilities, which manifests itself as infrastructure as code. what have you. So you have Terraform or CloudFormation templates. And a Gartner study just revealed that 95% of misconfigurations and vulnerabilities that ultimately get exploited are the customer's fault. And now with the Prisma Cloud capabilities, to Ashley's point, right at the IDE, you can figure out what the misconfigurations are and mapping it back to best practices, security controls from a compliance standpoint, ensuring that your databases are not exposed. There are a whole bunch of easily achievable actions that the DevOps teams can take to dramatically increase improve their security posture, which goes back to the 80-10-10. Now your SOC teams are literally freed up to really perform forensics on the really high value issues that they face. So this whole thing, when you pull together shift left, infrastructure as code with the right tooling, really helps address this entire spectrum of cloud native DevOps with agility.
I couldn't agree more, Vinay. That's absolutely correct. And actually, Alex, come back to something that you'd said as well there. We don't see the developers doing this. I've got to say that I've seen that in the past as well. I don't think it's true now going forward. One of the things that I was at a security conference recently, and a typical slide came up that kind of had a unicorn, and the security had to clean up after this unicorn, and the unicorn was DevOps, and that was this thing. And I think that, honestly, I think this is something that's breaking down now. There's still been this security is over here, and the rest of IT is over here. You know, it was siloed for good reason, segregation of duties, the difficulty in seeing results. You don't want everybody in the world to see the vulnerability scores of apps and things like this. But I think as part of that DevOps culture that we've been talking about, and the availability of the tools and the mindset changes, that is breaking down, and it is easier then for someone who's Vinay developing huge distributed apps to then not have that excuse, and I don't mean that about Vinay, doesn't have that excuse to say, oh, well, I couldn't test it. I couldn't get the security results. I asked, I raised a ticket 6 weeks ago, but nothing's happened. That's all flipped on its head now, just as everything that Vinay pointed out there.
So I'd like to set up a scenario for you, and perhaps you could help me with it. You know, we're now facing a situation where we're all basically here in our homes. You know, each of you are somewhere where you live, and the amount of people online is just increased exponentially who are working now, right? So, you know, now you're not just like spending your weekends online, but you're also or doing activities online when you're home, but you're home all the time. And there's been a real increase in attempts to phish and to hack. And we're seeing more efforts to reach into APIs and into configurations and, to really, to try to find some way where they can, where the hackers can find ways to earn some, to make some money, and they're not earning it, but to steal some person's money, so to speak. So what's the impact on downstream development when organizations do not shift left? How do these situations play out now? And what is there, is that a, what's the effect? I mean, that we see when organizations don't take these things into consideration?
They struggle. They struggle in the same way when we looked at things for, why companies are going through digital transformations, why we had software's eating the world coming through, and whether you think that's still the case, or whether it's Kubernetes is eating the world, or however you want to put it. If you're not operating at that speed, then you're too slow to react to things that are happening in production. So if you have a situation where, and hopefully not, but obviously the Unit 42 released information about the number of COVID-19 related URLs, domain names that got registered in order to be able to do some bad stuff with them. If you're not able to react fast and have that confidence in software being produced and pushed through CI/CD, it's gone through all the proper security gates and can be resolved quickly, then you're going to really lag behind, and you're going to have some major problems. Now, if your competitors are able to go faster than you and can be more secure and aren't going to have that hit to their reputation, when, as you say, Alex, everybody's a lot more aware of what they're doing online because we're all doing it now, I think they'll really struggle, to be honest.
What do you see, Vinay, Aqsa? Any thoughts on that?
I just came out of a customer advisory board meeting, and some of the customers there were from media industry and banking industry. And they said the same thing, like, we're seeing a lot more phishing attempts and a lot more attacks on our web applications and such. So that's why it becomes so important that you cover all your open doors, like secure them before you find out after an attack that it was exploited. And especially in a scenario like this, where everyone is in quarantine, delivery services, banking services, media services, even our jobs are all remote. So any hit in production can cause a huge impact in how we're working. That's why I think it becomes even more important that we're fast and we take preventive measures, shift left security, close all the exploits, and be more aware of developing a quality service rather than just send out a service and then wait for the attacks to come to start fixing them.
I mean, I couldn't agree with Aqsa and Ashley more. But to your point, Alex, I think even this morning, I think I read the bad actors are not taking a break, and they're trying to exploit wherever and whenever they can. And I think the way it precipitates from an operational perspective is SOC teams just get inundated, right? So if you're not practicing this hygiene of progressive security capabilities, reducing your attack surface, I mean, there's just inundation, and then there's lack of prioritization. So you don't know which are the alerts that you need to investigate and figure out what's going on and what are the implications. So, I mean, it's analysis paralysis, and the doors are wide open. So I think it's just more imperative to keep the lights on and providing these best-in-class services for enterprises to their customers, that they adopt these capabilities. And that's what we're hearing as well. There has been an increased appetite to ensure, maybe the whole situation with COVID-19 has given enterprises a little bit of a pause, and they're using that pause to actually ensure that they have the right security capabilities to address their security debt, if you will. So they are focusing a lot on security and hoping to, make improvements in their security practices.
What are some of the concerns that you hear every day, though, from like the SecOps team? Like, Ashley, you're talking about the presentation you saw with the unicorn and cleaning up after the unicorn, and they blame DevOps. There's a tendency for SecOps to blame DevOps. What are the concerns that they talk about when they're bringing up these these issues about the shortcomings that come with shifting left?
Yeah, that's really good. The presentation that I saw, actually, amusingly, was then putting a big red X through that and saying we can't operate like this. And what we've seen with the SecOps teams, when I speak to them, the concern is if you go into kind of the shop floor of a DevOps landscape where you're not used to Agile methodologies, you've not seen Scrum before, you've not seen whatever, a Kanban board, you've not come across this. If you go in there and suddenly you've got meetings that are 10-minute stand-ups in the morning, 15-minute stand-ups, where only certain people can talk because it's only you've got the pigs and the chickens. When you go in and you see that people are using, right, that team's using which software? Why are they using that? Shouldn't we have an enterprise version? When you see all this stuff shifting around, from a security point of view, all you see is rapid change, and it just looks like everything's on fire. And maybe a lot of the time it is on fire. But that's the thing. That's why we need more SecOps to come into that world, to be able to then go, okay, I get that we're moving fast. I understand these things are there. So for me, the blocker, and I'm maybe not fair to my SecOps colleagues, but the blocker is sometimes a bit of a fear of the unknown, a fear of looking at something and going, this is a totally new way of working, of delivering software, and it can be a fright. And so I find when I speak to them is going, right, can we talk about why this might be good? Forget about any of the concerns you've got with how it's being delivered. How could this be good? And talking about delivering software and this kind of thing. And then saying exactly to the points that Vinay and Aqsa have said, what if we could get some of that noise that you're seeing and pushing that back to the developers to be doing stuff? Because they're operating fast to try and fix things that need to be fixed. So that's kind of the fear. I think it's a fear that's the problem from a SecOps point of view. And I'm not talking about the personalities there. That's not the people. That's just seeing the whole change in the process and technologies.
And just to echo some of the sentiments that I hear when I talk to some of our customers, I mean, they have zero visibility. with DevOps, there's a lot of shadow IT because of that constant friction and inability to deploy as fast as they would like. So they're figuring out ways around it, and that's a huge problem. So they don't have visibility, so they realize that things need to change, that they need to meet DevOps where they are, and they're also wanting to take the posture that we'd like DevOps to take responsibility for the security, but we just want the oversight, So trust but verify. I just want to establish these guardrails. And if I have the ability to decentralize security, allow and trust my DevOps teams to do the right thing, but come in when I need to and ensure that the guardrails are being met, because that's also critical to our line of business needs, it's a win-win situation. So I think the biggest fear is every service that AWS is putting out there is being consumed the very next day, and security just can't keep pace. So if we give them the right tools to help them adopt security at the DevOps phase and the build deploy by the DevOps teams, I think it's just a recipe for success when you take the whole organization as a whole.
When you're thinking about immutable infrastructure, we're often thinking about programming infrastructure, right? We're thinking about how we can create these programmable capabilities. And a lot of it now does come down to infrastructure as code. And a lot of infrastructure as code requires, people to work in templates in many ways. So how are you seeing developers using infrastructure as code today? And why is security important in these scenarios when they're using these templates?
I see people doing that, and sometimes they have it goes both ways. Sometimes people will say, well, I'm using infrastructure as code, and therefore it can be audited at the code level, and so do I really need to worry about things in production? Now, first of all, of course, there's defense in depth, and then you go, well, once something is in production, it can still change in the time between you running your next check for your infrastructure as code. And then the final one that I usually, when I speak to people about, when they talk to me about immutable infrastructure and say, well, that must be secure if I've signed it off, is that, unfortunately, we're all human, right? We all make mistakes. And there's sometimes delivery that needs to take precedence over perhaps that pipeline that someone's put in. There's the temptation to change things in production with all the right reasons and all good intent, but people make changes to stuff. And this can be to circumvent a difficult test because a test is failing. And of course, we all know if a test fails, the best thing to do is switch off that test. Obviously, I'm joking about that, but that's what I see developers sometimes doing. And so, relying on the immutable infrastructure isn't enough, but it's certainly a step, and it's certainly a layer in that whole defense in depth. So, does it solve the problems on its own? No. Does it help a lot? Yes, absolutely.
Are you accusing me of bypassing a test there, Ashley? I've never done that.
Never.
No, but I think the infrastructure as code is obviously a means to an end, as we talked about it, right? The cloud is afforded large scale, and in order to deploy at large scale, you have to be able to reason about your code as reason about your infrastructure as code, and also have the ability to make it repeatable and reproducible, and also, but it's also come back to shoot us in our foot because, as we said, a lot of but maybe in a good way, because in the previous world, we would deploy all of these infrastructures and we would get to know about these misconfigurations after the fact, which is why I keep coming back to the fact that now there's a great opportunity for us, because every customer that we speak to is adopting infrastructure as code, because that is the recipe for success. And now with the ability to scan your infrastructure as code based upon these best practices, compliance standards for different industries, for example, and being able to identify these misconfigurations is tremendously useful to our customers. And do we see all of our customers getting there immediately? And that would not be the case, but it's a maturation process. And then also, we've also found that the shift left is not a binary. It's not like yes or no. Right? It's a process of continuous improvement. So as organizations mature their capabilities, they keep adding different kinds of security capabilities to their shift left posture, but net with the realization that is going to tremendously help them reduce their attack surfaces in runtime.
Aqsa, I have a question for you. And I wanted to ask about continuous delivery, and we just talked about that a little bit. And in Kubernetes, it can be quite complex to do continuous delivery if you're working inside Kubernetes. And there's been this movement to move it outside of Kubernetes itself into these, it's called GitOps, so to speak, and you're familiar with it, I'm sure, with this concept. So I'm curious your view on GitOps and how it can affect application security, because it seems like it actually could have a positive effect, because there's you're always trying to reach this desired state, but if you have a bug, you can always roll back and then be able to fix that bug and then move again toward that desired state. I'm curious in your perspectives on that from a developer point of view.
Anything that you can automate and write automation scripts based off of API calls is always better than doing terminal commands. So doing kubectl create, doing kubectl apply, if you can automate this using API calls, kind of like the CD tools provide for you, like GitOps, it always reduces the effort, the manual interaction. And imagine bigger scale companies, right? You don't have time to do cluster by cluster. You want to be able to see results within minutes. So even internally, like when we're writing, when we're trying to set up a quick demo environment, we may not always have time to set up all scenarios one by one. We want a tool like GitOps or a CD tool that we can write for once and then run it whenever we want a quick demo environment up. So use cases like that is what makes such tools really popular and I think even important as we move in a dynamic world. In a traditional world, maybe you may be okay with just going step by step, but we're moving to containers, serverless functions, clusters. They come up, go down so fast all the time. So you want something to keep up with such world as well.
Yeah, that's I couldn't agree more on that one. And the other part of the whole GitOps part is being the source of truth. If it's not in Git, it doesn't exist. But then that goes both ways. Of course, if the commit messages aren't any good, then you don't have that trackability, or traceability. But that's part of the whole peer review and those pull requests, like Vinay says, and Aqsa mentions from a developer side. That's where you can then track those changes. You can see those go through approval gates if you want before things can get merged in. So it's certainly those things happening with the automated tooling that's kicking in to give those reports to say, yes, it is what it says it is nice and secure, it is this, it is that. And then rolling that through to production. And then Alex, a key part there, being able to regress back a change to something else. When I started out, and I've not been too old, but a 6-week regression plan was considered okay. That was not bad. If we had a problem in production and we had to pull a change back, 6 weeks was okay. And in reality, we probably couldn't actually. It was going to be too much effort. It would be a new release that came along to over the top of that. But maybe that's just my poor skills that would be there. But so GitOps is really exciting. It doesn't do away with the need for that runtime security or the security throughout it, but it does enhance it. It does make it easier and more traceable and all the things I said.
Well, great. Vinay, why don't you take it out for us and give us your thoughts on how you see things moving forward in this effort to shift left? What are some of your thoughts on the tools and the technologies?
Thanks, Alex. I'm personally very, very excited about the possibilities because as somebody who's completely on the container and serverless bandwagon, I love the agility, love the ability to scale resources. And it's also something that is implicit is, treating your infrastructure as cattle and not pets. And it also goes back to the immutable infrastructure capabilities. I'm super excited by all these features that are available for DevOps team to leverage. However, you cannot have these applications deployed in production without the right security scrutiny. Hence, the Prisma Cloud suite to really, really meet developers where we are. I'm biased, obviously, but I'm super excited because as to meet the developers where they are, provide the context, give them the ability to make those fixes right when this code is fresh in their heads is unparalleled. And then, it also leverages different teams to apply their different capabilities. So in the build phase, which is the developer, you give him a loose set of policies, but allow them to make the fixes. Then it goes into the build phase where you can scan all your images, maybe with further tightening of those policies and provide the feedback. And then of course, last but not least, and it's never going to go away, the comprehensive security in the runtime. So I'm super excited for the possibilities for enterprises to leverage cloud native application deployment patterns with security that's delivered in a highly cloud native manner.
Well, thank you all for participating today in this discussion. I've been joined by Vinay Venkataraman, Cloud CTO, Prisma Cloud at Palo Alto Networks, Ashley Ward, Solutions Architect at Palo Alto Networks, and Aqsa Taylor, Product Manager, Prisma Cloud, Palo Alto Networks. So thank you all for joining us.